Okay, we're going live now. 1 second. One second. Still working. Apparently, I have to put in a title here, so.
It seems like these days all I got is time.
Okay, so here we are. All right. Okay, we're live. No, we're not live. Second.
Mine says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Oh, it does. Okay, good.
Good. We're live.
So we are live. So hi Hildur, and hi everybody. Thank you for joining us for the second part of our program for Your Environment Now. And I know Dr. Hildur quite well as a friend over at Soul Center, as someone who I've worked with and is always exploring and always finding out new things. I'd say that if there was one word I would have for you, Hildur, it would be passionately curious. You're a woman who certainly is not only a leader in terms of meditation and mindfulness, as a friend, as someone who's interested in Buddhism, but more importantly, you're very interested in life and all sentient beings, including the environment. So it's just wonderful to have you here. We do have folks online, so for the benefit of those who are online, there is a chat box should you want to use the chat box at any time to ask any questions. Please feel free to do so. We are recording this and it will be posted onto Facebook as well as onto YouTube, and your questions are more than welcome. And with that said, I just want to welcome you again, Hildur, and thank you so much for gracing us with your knowledge and your presence.
Thank you for having me. I really welcome this contribution here to our days, and the fact that we'll be going on every Wednesday at 10 o'clock. This is a continuing effort. There will be a new topic each week. And invited speakers. I am very happy to see my friend Raju here on with us today, the president of Rewild Long Island. And so anyone during the Q&A in the end or the discussion, I'd like to really include everyone, and especially if you have questions about rewilding. That's something I'm very passionate about right now. And after this presentation, I hope you get a feeling why we care to plant natives, rewilding, what that is. So my first Your Environment Now spiel last week was about Rewild Long Island, or why we would be rewilding, and the fact that native plants serve our insect population and support biodiversity better, right? But not all plants are equally supportive to life as we know it here on Long Island. And I just want to go over a few things we discussed last week. You should see my pointer here. So there's a big problem on Long Island, particularly. Organic waste is bagged in plastic bags, and we need to stop doing that. And pesticide, herbicide application is really out of control. That's a big problem. And at Rewild Long Island, we're really encouraging organic, sustainable, and pollinator-friendly practices. The enlightened response here would be bagging your yard waste in, at least in paper bags, and town of North Hempstead disposes properly of that. an even better response would be to compost your organic waste. And we will have, I'm hoping to loop in my friends from Rewild and from Transition Town, Port Washington, Paul Merkelson and more, to give us perhaps a session. One of those Wednesday sessions could be dedicated to compost, if there's interest in that.
That would be great, Hildur. Just to that point, if I can stop you for a second. So one of the things that I was very interested along that line was that we have a compost bucket, where we do the composting every year. And sometimes we've had success, sometimes not, but the whole idea of putting in leaves, the whole idea of making sure that you're turning over your compost and you're working with that. I thought that was a very good point. And then the other side of what you said last week, which was surprising for some, was the whole idea of the plastic bags versus the paper bags and where you could get those bags. Can you just sort of touch on that, just sort of briefly for those who weren't here last week? Or
yes.
Perhaps that would be very helpful, I think.
Yeah, the take-home message last week was, if you're not composting your yard waste, then bagging in paper bags, and you can get those paper bags in hardware stores, as well as I heard there were some friends who were online with us last week found paper bags and changed their habit after our session, and that was really encouraging. They found paper bags, I think, in Costco and Westbury.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to double check that. Another thing is, if we keep our carbon to nitrogen ratio, that means the browns versus the greens in our compost pile. If we keep that ratio, then a compost pile does not have to be have to stink, so to speak. You can even be working in the beginning with your yard waste, just to keep it simple if you're not ready for food scraps. But I think we should have a session dedicated to compost, and that could be next session. So before we go on, I just wanted to mention now that the Bradford pear trees are in full bloom, and the other day I was talking across the street with a neighbor who was exclaiming how wonderful that they were there. And in the back of my mind, I didn't want to be a a downer and say, no, they're awful. They're weeds. Here is a statement by someone called Wellness Mama, and she says in this, if you follow this link, gives us several reasons for why we should cut down these trees right now. The Bradford pear is an environmental disaster. They are prone to breakage, and they actually cross-pollinate with the Chinese. If you've heard about the calorie pear, and I've read articles that state that they're just as bad as kudzu in terms of being weeds. Why so? They take over areas that were dedicated to native plants and trees, and they don't support biodiversity in the same way. These are newly introduced trees, so they're not recognized by our insect population and caterpillars. A healthy oak would do much better in terms of supporting biodiversity. Biodiversity means variety of life. And when we start understanding the interdependent nature of life, we understand that we need to feed the insects so that the birds are pleased, and so on. And there is really, when we cut into the web of life, so to speak, there are consequences. So, and not just that, these trees, they're not long lived. They live for maybe 20, 30 years. And now with, there are these strong storms that come upon us, then these trees are really prone to breakage. I had one of these trees trees simply get pulled out of the ground in front of my house when Sandy hit us. So
so your message here is certainly get rid of the Bradfords, and from an allergy, if someone is allergy prone, certainly that would be a good reason as well. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We can plant native alternatives. At Rewild, we recommend the serviceberry or dogwood. And the Norway maple, I want to ask a question. Is that good or bad? It looks pretty. It's all over the place on Long Island. And it's on the most wanted list. Can you see that? It's a very small print here. But this tree, the Norway maple, is actually considered a weed.
Really?
On Long Island.
And
Yes.
is that Norway as in Scandinavian, one of the Scandinavian countries on purpose?
Yes, yes. So
No?
it comes from Europe.
Really?
And it was introduced because it's hardy. It can withstand pollution. And the problem is it has very shallow roots, so promotes erosion. It's not stable as such. It clears the area of any other growth. They spread like weeds. You'll see if you have Norway maple, the little seedlings pop up everywhere. When I'm weeding my garden, I'm weeding out those trees, the seedlings. And they're a real problem on Long Island. And meanwhile, the sugar maple is really struggling. This particular trees takes over and outcompetes native plants and trees. And there's a way we can actually tell if you're not sure if it's a Norway maple or not. Here's a Norway maple leaf and a sugar maple leaf. So they're different in appearance. You can look at the bottom of the leaf here.
So the sugar maple is more preferred, is what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes, the sugar maple is native, supports the insect population, and does not threaten the biodiversity. And unfortunately, they're struggling. And also, we all love our maple syrup. So how you can tell is if you break right here, if you break the leaf from the stalk right there, you'll see a white sap coming out, and that's how you know it's a Norway maple. It's a real problem. So Bradford pear and Norway maple, they should not be sold by nurseries on Long Island anymore. Raju, am I right? They're not. I think they're on the do not sell list, or at least I know Raju is with Long Island Native Plant Initiative as well.
I believe as much. That is correct.
Yeah. And so another problem we have is there's an actual sexism in the types of urban forestry that's been promoted for decades. And here's just one article on that, asking for more diversity in trees. It can feel like, it says here, a pollen apocalypse. I like that, pollen apocalypse. When the male trees spew their gametes and there is no partner to be found because the female fruit trees were not seen as preferable for the cityscapes because of the messy fruits and all that. So it was basically because of the cleanup involved. It was actually recommended by the USDA in the Yearbook of Agriculture. Only male trees should be selected so that we, don't have the nuisance from the seed. As you can see, that's a very interesting statement and shows a lack of environmental literacy right there. I think we're starting to do better now, but unfortunately, there's an overwhelming amount of male trees that don't have a partner to pair with because of this malpractice in planting. So it's very important to know what kind of trees we're planting and why. And
so even in the plant world, we're having troubles like that.
Yes.
Going back to the Bradford pear and the Norway maple, I'm just trying to understand from the viewpoint of the environment and from the viewpoint of from the physiology viewpoint of feeling healthy and being in commune with nature. I just want to get this straight. What you're saying is that those specific plants, from the viewpoint of being in commune with nature, feeling good physiologically, and being in touch with nature as it exists, whether or not that's the insects, the pollination process, or so on and so forth. The reason why we want to be aware of those plants and we want to, safeguard ourselves with not having them present is because physiologically, for us, we feel better. Is this true?
Well, in the terms of planting, for example, the fruit trees, only the male trees here. This is a different. If we have an imbalance in the ecosystem, it will affect us, right? In terms of the Norway maple and the Bradford pear, the imbalance is simply in not supporting the biodiversity that's there, right? So that's going to affect us economically if we're not feeding the pollinators. So these trees, if we have the Bradford pear and the Norway maple take over huge areas and we're not supporting the pollinators, we can just get ready for empty produce shelves at the supermarket.
Right. It's sort of like having a lot of junk food at the supermarket, but not necessarily having enough nutritious food. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a direct consequence on all levels. And as a bird watch, I'm a birder, so we already have lost about 30% of birds in North America alone. And that's a significant drop. That said, that will actually affect us in the long run. We may think, okay, I can live with fewer birds if someone doesn't care about birds, but there is a sequence of events that will eventually affect us, and we must do better. We must become more environmentally literate, so to speak. So there's something called citizen science. And here is my point. So why would we care about biodiversity? Why do we want to feed all levels of life, right? Because we're just one part. We're not on top of the food chain. We're deeply embedded in it, and we're dependent on it. And we're right now in the 6th mass extinction. Extinction rates at about 1,000 times faster than before. We're all familiar with what happened to the dinosaur. There is an acronym, HIPPO, that describes the major threats to biodiversity: habitat loss, invasive species like Norway maple, Bradford pear, and the list goes on. Pollution, population, overpopulation, taking over habitats, and overharvesting is threatening biodiversity. And unfortunately, if we don't behave, we could join that extinction wave. So it's really a matter of life and death. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm in a work group for Center for Biological Diversity, and we just launched a campaign before the coronavirus crisis. And the campaign is called Saving Life on Earth campaign. And we didn't think that was extreme at all. There are several things we have to do better. We must move away from fossil fuels. We have to protect land, conservation of land and oceans. illegal wildlife trade and trafficking has to stop. And I can give one of these environmental talks on the actual origin of the coronavirus at this market where illegal wildlife trafficking is taking place that causes problems when we disrupt habitats and displace wildlife. And stressed out wildlife sheds viruses that then affect us, and now it's a pandemic. So we must, I think the main point that I want to make today is we must reconnect with the natural world. We must know what's in the ground here. And we must take responsibility for the ground we're standing on. So what can we do in order
So
yeah?
wait a second. So can you go back a couple of slides if you don't mind?
Yeah.
You know, because I think that for those of us who are sort of on the periphery, right? For folks that are on the periphery that aren't really kind of tuned in to what you're talking about, a lot of this has sounded like in the past, like ranting and raving, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh God, there they go again. You know, oh
there
my
they go
God.
again.
No, really, seriously, do we have to hear this one more time? But this is this acronym I've never heard before. So the acronym is HIPPO, HIPPO, yeah?
HIPPO.
Right.
And we can, it's a real problem.
And certainly in terms of overpopulation, we're, you know, I think to the next slide, which is the you know, the what you talked about in terms of the Wuhan market and the wet market and the creation of the virus, you know, we're certainly dealing with some of the impact of that now, where we're seeing that, you know, the population is starting to thin, or the promise of lowering the population. Not that we want that to happen, but still, it's sort of when things get unbalanced, as they will. And
we've been actually fighting for years, trying to work on helping the pangolin, for example. The pangolin is an endangered species that's sold at the market in Wuhan and was thought to be the carrier, and is an actual carrier for a coronavirus that's 99% similar to the one that's now causing the pandemic. So it could have been the pangolins.
Well, they say it was the pangolin and the bat, right?
Yeah, they don't know the exact origin, but this is not surprising to anybody who's been fighting to stop this illegal wildlife trade. What happens to the pangolins is when you remove them from their habitat, they become very stressed. So you won't find them in a zoo because they won't eat or drink if they're removed from the natural habitat. So they die slowly on the way, in the hands of the poachers, on the way to the market. And this has been going on in fresh air, you know, open to all. Nobody's there. We need to have some sort of global council and regulations in place that stop this.
Well, certainly that would be wonderful. That would certainly get us towards the right end here. So I just want to, again, sort of look at this. You're talking about the sixth mass extinction. And for some folks, that sounds like sci-fi. You know, it sounds like so far out.
Yes.
And so, you know, something that you'd see on Star Trek.
Yes.
You know, never mind the fact that we may be actually dealing with it now. So I just want to underscore the importance of what you're saying here. And, you know, I think it's worth going back and looking at this in terms of reconnecting to the natural world and opening up our eyes. And, you know, this is important stuff, isn't it?
This is the most important. And that's also, and the good news is we can all participate in being part of the solution here. We can support Center for Biological Diversity. We can join Rewild Long Island and really actually start looking at our own backyard if we have one, or public land. Through work with Rewild Long Island, we both plant in public land and private, and we offer education. That's very important. And I'm going to skip this slide because I'm talking a lot and I want to hear from you. But I wanted to just end with mentioning the iNaturalist, The iNaturalist is a wonderful way right now as we're home, where it's an app what you can download to your phone, and you can become a citizen scientist. And there are about almost 1 million observers worldwide making, as you can see here, 33 million observations. I was excited that my humble observations were picked up by a citizen science project here, wildflower monitoring project. The City Nature Challenge is coming up with the iNaturalist application. And I'm going to skip this because I want to get to the final slide. But so iNaturalist, it's a simple app that you can download to your phone and you can use for plant identification and to educate yourself about what's right there with you where you're living. And then you can start taking steps. If one of our friends has made that statement that about 90% or 95% of our back and front yards are non-natives and invasives, and wonderful. Then here's my email if anybody wants to learn more about iNaturalist or Rewild, and I would like to receive questions and stop lecturing. What do you think about that?
That sounds great. Hildur, I first of all, the question Jay asked, the question did come up in terms of what the site was. And again, it's iNaturalist, spelled Naturalisti, and you can get it on the iPhone or on the Android. I'm downloading my copy right now.
Wonderful.
And, so that's good. And I'm going to open up the microphone for anyone who might have any questions. So everyone is unmuted now. And if you do not want to have your video shown on the stream or on the recording, you can turn your video off and you can just use your mic. And that would allow you to ask a question however you'd like. So
yes,
everyone is open now, so feel free.
And I really recommend this site, iNaturalist. They have a special application also for kids. And we can work with our kids on exploring and earning badges while we become more environmentally literate. So, yes.
Okay. So any questions that anyone might have? I think the big question is with using the app, from my viewpoint, using the app iNaturalist, this will allow us to see, going back to that analogy, what's junk food, what kind of plants are really weeds versus those that are really allow us to be more in tune with our environment. Is that true?
Yes. There you have, as I said, almost 1 million naturalists and scientists. So this is scientist supported. It's a citizen science project. If you record your data according to their instructions, then your data will help map out the distribution of natives versus non-natives and wildlife, and you become part of a wave of awareness where we understand what's growing where, and it's been really helpful in locating invasive species as well.
Oh, great. Yeah. So the question comes up, so basically you'd sort of scan it into the phone, I assume.
You take a picture.
Or you could upload it with a picture, huh? Okay.
Yeah, you take a picture and there's an algorithm. It's a wonderful, it's amazing actually. It's basically artificial intelligence, pattern recognition, and then you'll get suggestions based on just recognizing what it looks like. But then there's a team of naturalists and scientists that will join you in trying to figure out what it is.
Fantastic. And I've just opened it up on my phone and I see that I've got all these observations and places,
yes,
things that I can look at. So I'm really looking forward to exploring my yard. Yes,
it's so interesting when you start understanding what's there and how we can be part of the solution.
Fantastic.
Right, Hey, Hildur, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, no, I just wanted to say one thing about iNaturalist, which is really, really cool, is the community surrounding it. So if you make, the app makes some suggestions for you, and then you can select which species you think it is. And the really cool thing is there's a community of people that also are looking at your identifications, and they can correct you. So I had just last week, I'd gone out and it was very early and there were buds coming out on a plant. I had identified it. I thought, oh, this looks like a serviceberry, and I just picked the serviceberry. Then somebody else wrote back saying, no, the serviceberry leaves are oblong and the branches are like this. This is a Japanese cherry. So that was so cool that somebody else took out the time to actually look at my observation of a plant that was barely budding and gave me the right feedback to now know what it was and make that identification in the future. So, and you can have a record of all the identifications you've made on a map. So it's pretty cool. Right? The community part of it is really what makes it cool. The social intelligence as well as the artificial intelligence, so to speak.
Yes, yes, and almost a million naturalists worldwide. That are contributing. And when I was in Iceland, I took a couple of pictures, and immediately people are commenting on that over there too. So it's happening all over the world right now. We're mapping out the fauna and the flora together, scientists and naturalists. So naturalist is you and I right now caring.
Well, and
I didn't used to be one. I'm not an expert naturalist. I'm just somebody who cares.
Well, Hildur,
Right.
this is and Raju, thank you very much for that. I think this is a wonderful way now, given the time that we have and the real requirement to connect not only through technology, but to connect with nature.
Yes.
And what better way to do that than to have a guide? And that's what it sounds like you're offering here, not only through Rewild, but more importantly through the tools and the applications that you're providing through that organization and your knowledge. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us. And I'd love for Raju to end our segment today by perhaps explaining what's happening with the spring native plant sale, where we've moved it over to a Corona safe protocol. So here's our website, Rewild Long Island, and there is a little button you can click. Do you want to speak to that, Raju?
Yeah, just basically we wanted, now that people are quite unable to go out to the store and buy plants, but yet there is a huge amount of interest and value in doing things with our home and our yards. We are ordering from multiple nurseries, bringing them in, having very few volunteers do the distribution, and then have people just drive by and pick it up in a very safe way. That way, we allow people the enjoyment and the value of actually planting in their homes in this season, while at the same time keeping themselves safe and not spreading the virus. So hopefully we'll have a wonderful sale. If you're in the Port Washington, you have to be able to pick up from the Port Washington area. And if you are able to, you're more than welcome to go online. We are accepting orders online till April 19th. So thank you. Thanks. And otherwise, please feel free to browse those plants. And if you can find them at a nursery near you and can get them safely, please do so as well.
Fantastic. That's good information. And this has really been good, Hildur. Thank you. And thank you, Raju, for the information. We'll continue this next week. I'm looking forward to the next installment of Your Environment Now. And all of the information is really very, very, very helpful. So I hope you're all staying safe, and thank you everyone for listening. Again, if you have questions, you can write to Hildur at soul.center, and she will be more than willing and very excited, I'm sure, as she always is, to provide some information and insight. So thank you very much, Hildur. Always good. All right.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. So we're going to sign off here. You're welcome, everybody. Hold on. I'm actually not sure how to sign